Good evening, everyone, or good afternoon, or good morning, depending on where you're joining us from and when you are joining us. It's your girl, Marcy Thomas, and I'm so excited to be back with you for another episode of Live Well Sister. So please come on in the room. Go ahead and invite your friends. Go ahead and share this out. Like it, whatever you need to do to make sure that as many people as possible can be a part of what's going to be a really powerful and impactful conversation. So I am coming to you from the outskirts of Atlanta, Georgia, originally from Cleveland, Ohio, and I've lived a whole bunch of other places in between. And after this book, I'm probably going to tell that story, do the story work, so I can go ahead and tell the whole story of my life and my journey. So tonight, I am especially excited to have with us GG Renee Hill, who is an author whose books have helped thousands of people overcome the emotional obstacles keeping them from living fully expressed lives. Her releases include 2 guided journals, Self-Care Check-In, a guided journal to build healthy habits and devote time to you, and A Year Self-Reflection, 365 days, the guided prompts to slow down, tune in, and grow. Gigi is a creative coach and founder of the Inner Story Writing Circle, a membership community for writers and creatives seeking guidance, support, and tools for heart-centered writing about their lives. So I know that's a mouthful, and I really can't wait to get into this conversation that we are about to have with Gigi about her book, which will be out next week, if you're watching in real time, which is November 4th. So go ahead and pre-order if you haven't done so already. But she's here to talk about story work, field notes on self-discovery, and reclaiming your narrative. So without any further delay, let's welcome GG Renee Hill to Live Well Sister.
Hi, Marcy. Thanks for having me tonight.
Yes, I am so excited to have you here. And thank you for allowing this space to be one of the first spaces you talk to even before your book comes out. So thank you. I appreciate that.
Definitely. Happy to be here.
Yes. So how are you feeling about story work being out in less than a week at this point?
I feel good. I feel excited. I feel really present. I've worked on this project for years. So to be in this moment, I just really want to absorb all of it. And I feel a lot of gratitude. I'm ready.
Yes. And I know after having a chance to read it, I know that people are going to be ready for it as well. So first, I always like to ask people kind of who they are and how they found their way into this work. So just tell us a little bit about who you are and how you came to be a creative coach and start helping people to tell their own stories.
Sure. Yeah, I started off like very far from doing any type of creative work at all. I mean, I grew up and creativity and the arts was a big part of my life, but it was extracurricular, right? I was very much molded to focus on science and math and finding some type of more traditional career. And so when I went to college, I majored in marketing, I focused on business. I went into a business career for 12 years. I worked in corporate America, but I felt really disillusioned and disconnected in the job. I didn't feel fulfilled, but I didn't expect to really feel fulfilled in my job. I expected to kind of check off the boxes of what I was told to do. And I just was so focused on that. I wasn't worried about the fact at first that I didn't feel fulfilled. It was just like, okay, I just need to, have the job, have the title, have the salary. This is just what it is to be an adult. And
Right.
I started questioning that after a little while, like, is this really how I'm
Mm,
supposed to feel? I felt like for me, I wanted more than that. I really wanted to feel like connected to my job, like I was making a difference, like I was really using my gifts, like my contributions, like things that only I could give. Whereas I felt like in the jobs that I had, while I worked in a great place and I learned a lot and I met wonderful people, I felt like anybody could replace me. Like I'm just kind of I can do it, but is this what I'm
right.
meant to do? So I
Mm,
really started to question everything I thought I was supposed to do with my life. All the things my parents, like, who were both blue collar, just wanted me to finish. Neither of them finished college. They wanted me to finish college and they had their best intentions, but I just started to question if that's really what I wanted. So I started going to therapy for many reasons, but that was one of them. In my
mhm.
20s, I had 2 kids at that point, and I was anxious. I didn't have the language for it. I found out what anxiety was at that time. I
Right.
was overwhelmed. I just felt like I needed help. And so it had never occurred to me to go to therapy, but I had a girlfriend at work who spoke really highly of it. And she had a great reference for me, a Black woman. And she was like, you know what? I feel like there's a lot of things in your childhood, a lot of things that you've gone through that you talk to me about that you've never talked to anybody professionally about and help
Mm,
you. And so I was like, why not? I got great benefits. They'll pay for it. Let me just go ahead. And that's really when I started writing, journaling, like for the purpose of self discovery, to understand myself better, to process life. Just it became almost immediately like a coming home to myself, almost immediately. Like I had forgotten that I liked to write. And I loved writing growing up. I liked telling little stories. I loved English class. I knew I was good at writing, but I never used it as like a tool for myself. It was just something that I felt comfortable with. But as soon as I started thinking about, oh, I can use this as a way to understand what's going on in my head, what's going on in my life, to process things, I just never looked back. And from then on, I went on to start sharing what I was writing a little bit. Little by little, I got more and more into it. Fast forward to probably within 5 years, I was starting to, maybe less than that, I was starting to blog. I was starting to do some freelance writing. And I started thinking, could I really do this as a career? Like, I had no blueprint for that. I had no examples of that. And I was really, I had kids, I had a family, but probably, I think it was about 5 years, 5, 6 years into that development, I took the leap and I said, something's really pulling me, like this is what I'm supposed to do. And as I was writing for myself, I also started realizing that I had this pull to share with others how they could use writing,
mhm.
to because I knew so many women. I've always been a girl's girl. I've always had a lot of, close, female relationships, and even people at work that, even, male and female people at work that I'm one of those people that's like, I hardly ever have like small talk. We're always going deep
Right.
conversation,
Right. You talk
talking
about
about
that in the book.
life, right? Talking about life, talking about the meaning of things. So just in general, I have that inquisitive, like, how do you really feel type of vibe when I talk to people. So
Mhm.
that came through in my writing, and my creativity was really like sparked by that, by like wanting to create ways so people could see how writing could help them go to that deep level themselves. And I
Mhm.
just kept following that trail, like, of what was lighting me up, what was making me feel that fulfillment I was lacking in corporate America. And I just kept going.
And you know what? I really love that because there are a lot of people who feel the same way that you felt, and
Mhm.
they aren't able to maybe pinpoint what it is.
Mhm.
They aren't able to maybe shift. And I mean,
Mhm.
I understand, like you already said, you had a family. I mean, and we will talk about in the book, you share a lot of your personal life and your personal
Mhm.
story. We'll dive into that a little bit. But I mean,
Mhm.
you had a family, you had responsibilities, you had certain things
Mhm.
that you still had to take care of. But I
Mhm.
love the fact that the calling on you was strong enough that you figured out a way to make that work. You saw the importance in that. So that's number one. Number two, I love the fact that you didn't train for this necessarily. Talk about that as well. A lot of times we feel like we can't do a thing if we don't have a certain piece of paper or a certain, certification or whatever the case may be that says that we don't have what it takes to do a certain thing. So I love that through this process that you have, come into that space of realizing that you have what it takes, because it is a gift and it is a calling.
Yes, absolutely. And those are such great points, because we, in line with the whole idea of story work, there are these stories we tell ourselves of what we can't do and what our limitations are. And a lot of times the first step to thinking bigger than that is just a question, like, well, why not? Like, why, have I ever thought about this differently? Where did this belief come from? And that can open just a little bit of curiosity enough to keep, again, following those little breadcrumbs. And I mean, I always tell people, like, I started gradually writing, and then I took this big leap. I'm like, that's not everybody's path. It doesn't always have to be a big leap in there. It can continue to be baby steps and just really grow gradually. I got impatient and ended up taking a leap, but that was my journey. That's what I ended up doing. But yeah, everybody's path looks different, but just creating the space for that curiosity. When you feel, because I feel like life speaks to us, spirit, whatever your beliefs are, speaks to us through these little nudges and little pulls that we feel, and we can pursue them in just like the smallest of ways, and really learn more about what our lives could be about if we were open to thinking outside of the box.
Thinking outside the box. And that's, we're going to get into all of that, because this is really a part of what that story work looks like, because there are the stories that have been told to you, because of someone else's experience.
Yes.
That they're telling you what your life should look like, or what it should shape up like, or, what you should feel based upon the things that are happening. There's that story. And then there's the story work that you do, that you can start to tell your own story of healing and resilience and all of these other things. So I love that. And in this book, yes, it's field notes on self-discovery and reclaiming your narrative. So it's something for us, and there are exercises and things in here that we're about to get into a little bit. But before we do that, I just want to ask you about the process of writing the book and telling so much of your own story, because we learn a lot about you, Gigi, in this book, and your family and your history and the things that allowed you to even be able to develop this framework.
Yeah. So in terms of like, what was it like sharing so much of my story in the book? I knew that I wanted that to be part of it. And I was so grateful to find a publisher that would allow me to tell the story that way, or I should say, write the book that way, because I was concerned that publishers would want me to make it more straight self-help, because you mentioned I did the 2 journals. So in those journals that did really well, I was offering prompts and just I may have shared a little bit about myself in the introduction, but not really. It's mostly about, providing the tools for the reader to use in their own journaling practice. And those were great projects. I loved working on them. But even before I worked on them, I've been working on story work, what is now story work, years before that.
Okay.
2016 is really when it started. And I wasn't sure that it would be a book, but I knew I wanted some type of way to tell my story. And I had self-published before, told bits and pieces, but I wanted something that really told my story, but I was still figuring out what my story was at the time. So it took years, right? So I wanted to bring those 2 worlds together. I wanted to bring the memoir aspect and telling my story, and I also wanted to provide tools. And in the process of writing it, I realized that I didn't want to separate those 2 things, because I'm a coach, but I'm also a self-healer myself. I'm going through the journey too. So I wanted to be able to use my life as an example, and my story, my narratives, and like how I reclaimed my defeated narratives and these pigeonholes I found myself in, and these patterns I was stuck in, how I reframed it. And to do that, I wanted to go back and forth. And that's why the book has this sort of conversational tone to it, where I'm sharing a little bit and then I'm like asking you questions like, how about you? Do you have this? Do you, so, and that was really important to me, because I think that's also when I step outside of myself and notice the way I work with clients, the way I facilitate workshops, that's how I facilitate. That's how I coach. And one of my longtime clients and members of my group said, it's like one of your workshops in a book, right? It's the storytelling, it's the gentle guidance and the nudging, and inviting the reader to think and to share themselves. And I love that, because that's what I wanted it to feel like. I didn't want it to feel like straight self-help where I'm kind of talking at you, but I also didn't want it to just be my story. I wanted it to be like we're sitting around like a sharing circle, like sharing stories and being vulnerable and opening up. And that's hopefully how it comes across.
It definitely does. And I really find that powerful because, I can speak for myself. I can speak for people that I know that it's probably very hard to open up and, tell certain stories, because you might be, well, there can be a lot of fear. There can be all kinds of things that are revolved around opening up and telling stories. And when you can find yourself in a space that feels safe, where you can, where that person who's leading and guiding you isn't just sitting back like, so therapy, that's pretty much what it is. Your therapist is not going to tell you about all their drama, right? They're not supposed to. They shouldn't. Right. Mm-hmm. But in a situation like this, you can be in a group and a lot of people are sharing, and there's just something about that transparency that feels very human.
Yes. I fell in love with that when I started writing and going to workshops and being in community and then creating my own spaces. I was like, going to workshops, and I love writing workshops and I love taking classes. I love learning, but I also found that they're not all the same. The vibe is different in different spaces. Right. And so I started thinking, like, I think I posted my first workshop in 2016. I was like, I want to create a space sort of like when I talk to people one-on-one or in small groups, I really like to create that safe space. Like I said, I like to go deep, right? I was like, I want to create a whole environment classroom like that, right? That just feels like the energy would feel so good to just be able to strip all the pretense and all the masks and stuff away. And just vulnerable storytelling is something that I feel called and gifted at creating safe spaces for. And I can own that now. Before I felt like, who am I to, why would people come into my space and feel comfortable, to do that? And I just really had to grow into that gift and just own it, because I was like, when I started sharing my stories, being vulnerable, getting over my fear, being just discerning, of course, about who I was sharing and what spaces, of course. Absolutely. I was like learning, how do you create a safe space? How do you just practice that discernment? But once I started learning that, I realized that I felt more empowered each time I spoke my stories out loud, and like the shame that I'd been carrying, the guilt and all of the things that makes us want to mask and hide things, it was being stripped away. Because once you start sharing in safe spaces, like shame can't survive that. You're just kind of like, I'm owning it now, and you can't really, so it is a process. I'm not saying anybody who's listening to this, like, just go out and start sharing, like, anywhere, anytime. You have to really be conscientious about finding the safe spaces, and coaches or healers or whatever typically are either trained or have some intuitive gifts that allow them, to create those kind of spaces. And I think it's an honor and a blessing, honestly, to really feel called to do that, because I think it's so needed.
It is needed. It is needed. So, Story Work, the book. So, getting into it, it's broken down into 3 parts that all, dive into different topics, a total of 10 chapters. And, I told you before we came on, for for everyone who's watching, we're not going to talk about every chapter in depth, but just to kind of give you, to whet your appetite for this book, to go ahead and pick it up, because admittedly, I read through it because I wanted to have this conversation with you, but I'm going to be going back and working through the exercises and working through the questions. And I'll just tell you all right now, Gigi has some story work exercises as well that you can get into through her Substack that I already told her I'm going to get on those because I'm like, oh, I got a lot of stuff I need to put pen to paper. Because, well, what's one quick observation before we get into story work? Or question, I should say, what would you say differentiates doing this type of story work from, say, just your basic journaling or writing in a diary?
Good question. I developed over time a system that revealed itself through my journaling where I at first was just venting. I would usually journaling for me was venting. I would only go to my journal when I have big feelings about something. Found myself sort of talking in circles. I was kind of always coming to the page when I was upset or triggered or something was going on. And I didn't feel after a while like I was really growing from it. I was just kind of like getting that cathartic release, but not really evolving too much from it. And over time, I started to go back and read what I was writing and look for patterns and look for themes and just really sort of observe myself and like say, I'm thinking this, I see like this all kind of traces back to this. And so that was part of the development of it all. And then I started reading more craft books, reading about writing to heal and taking classes. It was more the reading though, reading about writing to heal. I realized a big part of it is actually telling yourself stories, thinking about memories and situations that illustrate things that you might be going through in your life. So if I'm noticing like, man, I really am down on myself. Like I really don't like act like I think I have good self-worth, but I don't act like I have good self-worth. I'm just using that as an example. And then the power of saying, what are some examples of ways currently that I'm showing up and I'm not honoring my worth? And then going back in time and saying like, when did that maybe get started? And so it was this process of self-discovery, of looking at the things that are just sort of coming out organically that you're venting. I'm not saying don't vent. There's right. Still power in that, but Absolutely. Then taking it further, looking at it, seeing what patterns you see, and start writing some stories to yourself and memories and situations where those things are coming up. So story work is like the combination of those two things. It's like the self-discovery and self-inquiry, and then the storytelling aspect where you start really breaking down and telling these stories to yourself. And we'll probably get into it more later, but there's a method that really is the foundation of it all. It's this expressive writing method that really shows you how therapeutically to write to heal in a way that's been researched and studied and is shown to improve your mental and physical health, help you to find meaning in your experiences. And that's ultimately what we want, is to find meaning. We don't want to just vomit on the page and stop there. We want to start saying, okay, what meaning am I assigning to my experiences? What are the thought loops I'm having that I'm stuck in, right? And to start really sort of being our own coach in a way, right? Our own pattern reader, noticing these things about ourselves so that we can start to grow in our language from those things.
Yes, thank you for that. Because I know I've got some journals. I got a drawer full of them, like right here next to me. Mm-hmm. And sometimes when I go back, like, ooh, feel like I'm talking about the same stuff over and over again. Right. But then it's like, talking about story work, I go through that process and then I can, really heal where I'm not having to have the same conversation with myself over and over again. So, but in the book, you start out with roots and origins, and it's just that. It's just that, when we go back to childhood, and I know sometimes people don't like, oh God, they're going back to the childhood. but it's so important. So many things happen to us and with us in those formative years that show how we show up as we get older.
That's right.
And in there, one of the chapters, months turned into years, you talk about our thoughts can bring about limiting beliefs, assumptions, all these sorts of things that dictate how we show up even as we get older.
That's right. It starts with conditioning, family narratives, things we were told, maybe things we were punished for as kids or we were praised for as kids, cultural expectations, societal norms and narratives. All of those things take root in childhood. And they become such a part of who we are and our identity that sometimes we don't realize that we can negotiate those things, we can question those things if it doesn't feel true to who we are as we become our fully grow into ourselves as adults. We can question those things, and it can feel wrong at first, right?
Mm,
Like you can't go against what your mama told you. Or like, or whatever the narrative is. But there is an important element of, we can't just focus on, well, what's wrong right now? And let me just dress the surface level. It's kind of like, what's the root? Like if you have a health problem and your doctor just keep trying to treat the symptoms, but not dealing with the root cause, right? You got to like take the time to explore that root cause. And I would just say a note of caution too, like you said, going into roots and origins into childhood could be very volatile for people. So it's not something that I say to do lightly, or to do without support, to do without, being gentle with yourself. You don't have to go right for the hardest things, but there's definitely a benefit to noticing what stories or narratives are not feeling supportive in your life right now, and gently going back to see maybe where those things started.
Right. And this comment is in alignment with some of what your story is. It's saying discovering my mom manic depressive display at age 7 has me wanting to put your book on hold when a library has it. Thank you for that comment, India. But just, to give a little bit of your backstory, maybe some of the things that are part of your roots, there is a situation with your mom that you have navigated that played a big factor in some of this work that you ultimately have done.
Yes, absolutely. When I was a child, I think her symptoms started presenting to me. I wasn't aware of it until I was like 9 or 10 years old. I don't know about the adults. I think from talking to different adults in my family, my mom's symptoms started showing up earlier than that, but she was still very high functioning. And over the years, from about 9 to 10 to she was diagnosed when I was about 18 or so. She was undiagnosed, but she was having just progressively, her mental health was declining and declining. My mother would hear voices and have hallucinations. She was very paranoid. And so she was always accusing people of trying to hurt her, coming after her. And eventually she was diagnosed with schizophrenia. But when you're a child and none of this is explained to you, and you are silenced when you ask questions, and also in the Black community, mental health was very stigmatized. So it was very much silenced because the family wouldn't want any type of negative attention or reflection on, you just don't want to bring any negative attention to the family. And so that was a big concern. So it wasn't talked about. So I learned how to deal with it. I learned how to play the role I needed to play. If my mom was having a meltdown in public, I knew how to get us safely where we needed to be to kind of smooth things over. I knew how to go along with if she, instead of trying to push against if she was accusing me of something, instead of trying to push against it, I knew how to just kind of get through the situation and deal with it. And so all of those things start to shape you and how you deal with people, how you deal with yourself. You feel like you always have to avoid conflict, and so to the point of the comment, right? Like you realize that maybe some of the behaviors that you display as an adult are rooting back to how you had to cope as a child, or maybe different experiences that you've had that have just, when you're a kid, you're just reliant on your parents for survival. So whatever you need to do to stay in that good standing and to get through, you're going to do. And we don't realize how rooted it gets in our identity and our behavior.
It absolutely does. And so thank you, India, and thank you for sharing that, Gigi. But just, no matter what that thing is that you're going through, in my case, it wasn't that, but I had parents that divorced when I was at a certain age. So, I went from having one life, to having a different life. And not that the other different life was bad, but it was different. You know what I mean? At a formative stage in my life, a lot of things changed, and it definitely had an impact on me. And, I think even at my big age, there are some ways where it's still does have an impact on me. Just things, maybe the way I relate to people or how close I get or whatever, because of the things that happen at that point. So, that's what I'm going through this book.
Yes. I mean, yes. You just realize like, wow, like there's certain things that I started to believe or expect from people that it really feels like part of who you are. You don't realize that it's something that you adapted to or like a coping mechanism, things like that. Yeah.
The India saying, I cope by always being the strong one as the oldest of the brothers.
Yeah.
Exactly. You learn certain things. You learn certain things along the way.
That's
So
right.
in one of the other chapters in that section of Roots and Origin, you talk about smile and wave. And that kind of speaks to the fact of, we're showing one thing publicly, but what might be happening behind the scenes is something different. So you see people like, hey, and all hell's breaking loose at home.
Yes. I have always been, ever since childhood, I've always been very just sort of looking deep into people beyond the surface and wondering about their lives. Maybe because I romanticized like this normal family. Like I knew that behind closed doors at our house, it was quiet. It wasn't like this constant chaos or anything like that. It was a quiet chaos. And so, even I could have company, things like that, and there's probably minimal times anybody saw anything out of the ordinary. It was a very quiet chaos, but it was very consistent and persistent. So I would just wonder, like, are other people's households like this? Like, we seem normal, so everybody else seems normal, but is it really, right? So I would, in that chapter, I talk about how we'd be riding down the street and I would see, like, how when you're little, you'd be like, little houses that, like, I like that house, or I like the way that family looks. And I'm like, I wonder if there's some crazy stuff going on behind closed doors, though.
Because a lot of times there is. Every family has some dysfunction in it, okay?
But when I was little, I really thought it was just my family, right? Like I would wonder, and I would watch the Cosby Show, and I'm like, that's how most families are, right? Or like sitcoms, like, they have their little problems, but what people are hearing voices and like, getting up in the middle of the night doing crazy stuff. So I thought that's just me. So that's, again, just a childlike simplification, not realizing that there's so many things that go on, that families, humans are just complex and messy, and that you're not, there's always something going on beneath the surface. But as a child, I didn't realize that. And so I would just romanticize, like, oh, I just want, normal family. And so as an adult in that chapter, I'm like smiling and waving at the neighbors, but I'm like,
yeah, what's really good? What could potentially be going on? Or as so what else could be true? Like what you see, but what else could be true?
Yes, yeah.
But in this particular section, you also talk about new storylines. And I just found that really, because we're talking about story and the power of story and reclaiming your narrative, is all about the story, right? And how the stories are told. And it's like you can have the one story, but there are ways to rewrite or reframe that story. Help lend towards healing.
That's right. And the creativity is such a thread through the book, and that's something we all have access to. Creativity is universal. And sometimes when I hear people say that they're not creative, I like cringe, and I'm like, let me change your mind about that. I was like, let's broaden the way you think about creativity, because the thing with like a fixed narrative, or like let's say I decided for a while there in my life, I decided that my mental health was very fragile, and that I was eventually going to develop symptoms like my mom and get sick like my mom. I had almost convinced myself that this was my destiny. And I had so many other limiting narratives like that I just decided that things weren't going to work out for me, and that I wasn't good at this. I wouldn't be able to do that. And it was a fixed, almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy. And it really dictated like my actions and things like that. And that's a storyline. You tell yourself, I'm the black sheep, or nobody understands me, or I'm bad at this, or I'm too much, or I'm not enough. These are just storylines. And they can really evolve into whole, like, well, I can't go for that job, or that opportunity, or I can't find love because of this. And it's a storyline. So I talk about there's 7 story plots that Christopher Booker, who's the author of the 7 story plots, he positions as the 7 frameworks that all stories are built from. People who write novels, people who write movies and film, screenwriters, there's a lot of them come from some variation of some of these 7 plots. So even your average everyday person who's not a novelist, who's not writing, a story, if you think of your life as a story and yourself as a character, it helps you to tap into that universal creativity that we all have to break out of some of these fixed narratives, right? And I love that as a pathway because, again, we all have access to that. And sometimes reality can just feel so big. Like, as soon as your creativity starts to say, well, what if this? It's like, no, girl, but I got those bills, or I got this, or I have evidence that I'm not good enough because this, I failed at this, I failed at that. And reality and cynicism just starts to close in. But if you can allow your creativity some breathing room, you can imagine different storylines. If you think of yourself as a character and just use your imagination. So one of the storylines is the tragedy storyline. And that storyline is just basically saying, this is my narrative. This is what's going to happen. There's no hope. There's no any way out of this situation. I've just accepted defeat. And so in the book, I position that as like a baseline. I ask the reader, think about some narrative you have in the head, you've gotten in your head where there's no hope for change. Even something as trivial as, like, I talk about in the thing, I'm bad at math. I had just decided, like, I'm bad at math. Anything to do with math, I'm going to fail at. It doesn't have to be life or death things. It could be something simple like that. Or, I can't start a business because I'm not good at finances. So I'm just going to, even though I have this dream, I'm not going to do it because of that. Like, you see how it can hold you back. So that we could call that a tragedy storyline. There's no hope. The other 6 plots are all transformational. They're all symbolize some way of how that character, you, could transform that limiting belief, that fixed narrative, into something else. One of them is rebirth, right? So in a rebirth story, that character has some type of experience or meets someone who changes their mind, who awakens them to something that gives them a change of heart. What could that look like for you, right? What has been a rebirth moment maybe in your life? And to put it in perspective for people who are listening, an example of a rebirth story is The Grinch, right? The Grinch meets Cindy Lou Who, right? And has a change of heart. She opens his heart. Right. And so that's just to put it in perspective what a rebirth story is. Another example is overcoming the monster. So an example of that might be something like David and Goliath, right? Nobody would think that David could beat Goliath, but he was brave. He had heart. He took his little, what was it, a slingshot or something, and he beat Goliath. So in our day-to-day lives, a character could be a conceptual monster, right? Like addiction or, an abuse or something like that, or even just any concept that's holding you back. And you can plug that story and say, well, what qualities do I have that could allow me to overcome this thing? Or maybe what resources or support do I have that could allow me to overcome this thing? So there's 6 of them. There's 6 other storylines, and they all represent some type of transformation. And by using creative thinking and just stepping outside of your reality for a minute to think about it creatively, that can open the door to real, actual change, because you start allowing yourself to imagine, well, maybe, I could, if I allow myself to think outside of these limitations this box I've put myself in, how could I think about this differently? And that's the opening to a whole new vision for your life and a whole new storyline.
And I love that so much. And there's so much power in doing that, because it kind of goes back to when we were saying, sometimes it's a story that you're telling yourself, the stories that other people are telling you, and how you still got the right, you got it. I know it's not good English. You have the right to rewrite your own story and tell the story that you want to tell.
That's right.
There's some things that's going to happen when you do that, possibly, probably, but you have the right to do that. But it all starts with, what you decide to, with a mindset and some mindset shifting and things like that. So, and that kind of lends itself to the next section of the book, where you talk about truths and lies.
Yeah.
And in this particular section, the very first chapter, you're talking about the masks that we wear. And I just found that so powerful, because you talk about there's 3 different masks that we tend to wear. All of us, no
Mhm.
matter who we are.
There's three faces, right? So it's this Japanese philosophy of three faces. One of them is the face that you show to the world, the public, right? And one of them is the face that you show to your family and close friends. And the other one is your true self, your true authentic self. And I think as we go through life, it kind of evolves from our true authentic self to, okay, family and friends. And then we get out and we realize that it's not, we don't feel safe showing our true authentic self in the public. We feel like, okay, we've learned what's accepted, what's not, what fits in, what gets us where we want to be, what makes us feel like we belong, all those things, approval. And before we know it, we are a version of ourselves. We're wearing a mask, we're performing, we're pretending, and it's exhausting. And it's to sustain that over time is going to wear you out. It's going to wear you out. Even when you're wearing that second face, which is the family and friends, like you might have certain, like you have to show up a certain way around your family. You got to show up around, a certain way around this group of friends, that group of friends, these acquaintances, these coworkers, whatever it is. And we lose touch with that. Sometimes we don't even remember who we, what. There was a time in my life where I was like, I don't even know what I really like or what I really need, because I'm just so dependent on pleasing other people and or fitting in or like maintaining this person's being happy with me. And but what do I really like? What are my preferences? What do I need? What makes me feel lit up? What, like, when you and I'm sure so many people listening have felt that moment where you're like, what, I feel like a stranger to myself a little bit, like I've lost myself. And that's a scary feeling, but it's also a powerful feeling when it's an opportunity in that. There's so much opportunity in that because at least you're becoming aware of it and you can do something about it. It's very unsettling though to realize, like, sometimes you look around and like your job, maybe even the way you dress, the way you do your hair, the way you spend your time is all to please other people or to fit in or to fit some type of image. And you just feel like lost in the sauce and you don't even know where you get to come first in all of that. So that whole section about the three faces is really ultimately about, like, what's it going to take for you to get back to getting to know yourself again, so that you can ultimately become more rooted in that self and bring that version out so that you can be that version in your relationships, in your job. I know that it's more complicated than that, right? I know it's very complicated in navigating these things, but for me personally, it was very much something that I decided I don't want to have to perform anymore. I don't want to have to pretend. I want to build. I want to be able to exist in my relationships and in my work as myself, and trust that anyone who loves me, wants to be in relationship with me, wants to work with me, will accept my whole self, because I don't have the energy or the desire anymore to jump through the hoops and pretend and perform. I don't have it in me anymore to do that. So, and it can be done in such a a generous way. And what I mean by that is you can give other people permission. You can deepen those relationships, right? It gives other people permission to do the same. It really deepens, like, your connection with people. When the connection is pretend, there's a little bit of pretending and performing going on, it's not as genuine of a connection, right? So it's really a generous act to yourself and to the people in your life, I think.
Yes, and that just really stood out to me, that whole part of, the faces, because we do wear different faces. And it's like, but what happens when, that face is just the one that's you and the real you, and that starts to evolve. And then some of these other places where maybe the face looks a little different, sometimes, how can I put it? It's not always accepted. So there is a fear that may show up in that, or a challenge that may show up in that, because a lot of times it is a thing of people pleasing, or what's going to happen if, maybe I evolve and I'm wanting to be this person that the woman that, or, person that I truly want to be, but yet people have known me with this different face, so to
Yeah,
speak.
that's scary. Mm-hmm.
That's scary. But,
Mm-hmm.
in order for us to like really reclaim our own narratives and all
Mm-hmm.
things, you
Mm-hmm.
got to work through it. And,
Yeah,
I always say the cream rises to the top. And
that's right. That's right. It really does filter out relationships and situations that aren't really meant for you. There's a lot of talk in the book too about just like alignment. And if
mhm,
it's not aligned, that's where grief sometimes does come in, is having to let certain things go, having to let sometimes old versions of yourself go. And it's hard. I'm definitely not going to play that down at all. It's a bit
right,
scary and it's hard, but ultimately I feel like it's worth it, and there's so much fulfillment and abundance on the other side of it, that it's a journey that yeah, it's worthwhile.
it's worthwhile. It
Yeah.
is. It is.
Mhm.
In that area, you also talk about, being an unreliable narrator, about the fact that the growth that we experience is not linear, that
Mhm.
we all have strengths and superpowers, and that our differences are divine. But because you just brought up grief, I do want to talk about that,
Mhm.
because this is a chapter that says nothing is ever lost.
Mhm. Mhm. Nothing is ever lost. The concept of that is the idea that every experience that we have, every version of ourselves, every relationship that we have, people that we love, situations we love, jobs, seasons in our lives we have to leave behind, we take with us all of the beauty. We take the pain as well. We take the joy, we take the lessons, we take the values. We carry that with us. And very intentionally, we can choose to look at something we've lost for what we gained from it, and try to bring that. So when my dad passed away, I use that as an example. When my dad passed away, and grief is something that's ongoing. You never get done grieving. But what I try to do is think about lessons my dad taught me, things that I learned from things he actively taught me, and things that I learned that from just he modeled, right? And things that I learned from stuff he did that I didn't like too. Like all of those lessons. And I feel like me expressing that. One thing my dad was really good at, was that I'm not as good at, is just like staying in touch with family. Every time it was somebody's birthday, he would come and he would say, "Here, come on, sit down. We're gonna call Aunt such and such. We're gonna fill out this card." So when he passed, I was like, I'm gonna put all the family's birthdays on my calendar, and I'm gonna try to at least a text, a birthday
Right,
text, like just
right.
little ways to bring that person you're grieving, like their habits, their qualities that you loved, into your behavior, things that you honor. That's just one small example. And then also, nothing is ever lost in terms of like, even, there's so many different types of grief, and I break them
Yeah.
all down in the chapter. There's grief over, my mom and I are estranged. So it's this ambiguous grief of like, I lost her before I lost her, if that makes
Yeah.
sense. So we're not in relationship now, and I lost her very gradually, because of her mental decline. But I still make that effort to remember, like, my mom, even as her mental health was declining, she made sure that her baby had all the educational opportunities. She still really showed up for me. She exposed me to the arts. She exposed me to church and to God, and poured into me so much, even in the midst of her struggle with her mental health. So
Yes.
I try to look for the light and acknowledge the dark, right? The hard things and the blessings. And so I feel like nothing is lost, because we need all of that. It's a human experience. We don't want to just bypass the difficult things, or try to forget or avoid or push it away. But we also don't want to overlook the joy and the light and the efforts that people made. And just because maybe someone, maybe in your story, made things hard,
Mm-hmm.
what were the things you loved about that person,
Right.
and what shaped them, right? So it's like really looking at life in this way of like, all of it makes us who we are. And so we carry all of that with us. And that can be a really beautiful thing if you choose to embrace it.
Mm-hmm. And all of those things are a part of your story.
That's right.
All of those things.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm just thinking, and I mentioned to you before we came on, I've lost my father as well. And, this whole thing of all loving reading and, all these sorts of things are things that I got from him. I know that he would be like all deep into, he'd probably watch every show and have something to say about every conversation, and we would chat about which books, I think he would like and all those sorts of things. So, it's something that the people that may not be here anymore, there are things that they left with you.
Yes.
Their memories. There might be some stuff that's not as good, because it's not always, sunshine and roses in every situation. But to understand that they're still with you, but it's in a different way. It's a different dimension of them being with you now.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, absolutely.
And so in the last section, one of the things you talk about the power of words. We do need to lean into that a little bit, because we hear this, in church they say the life and death and the power of the tongue.
Mm-hmm.
And so the power of our words, I do want to lean into that a little bit, because sometimes the things that we say to ourselves are not things that are healing. I'll put it that way.
That's right. That's right. That's where there's a lot. That chapter is really heavy on the like narrative coaching, like really looking at the things you say to yourself, your self-talk, your thoughts, which is so hard, like how you control your thoughts, right? And the things you say about yourself and the things you speak and the way you use your voice, right? Though that I feel like when I go through that section, I have a intensive that I do that's around this work. I always say that's like really like one of the hardest things to really look at and to work at, because I guess I don't know why it's the hardest thing. It just is. It's just very hard to change some of those patterns, I guess. Mm-hmm. And I went through a period in my growth and development over the course of writing this book, and my transition from my life before, where I was, doing other types of work, and sort of allowing myself to evolve into this identity as a creative, and I think of myself as a healer now. And I could not own that identity before at all. It was a lot of layers I had to shed. And even just sort of shedding a lot of my victim narratives that I would say about myself, self-deprecating things I would say or that I would believe, that I guess maybe they made me feel safe. Maybe they made me feel like I don't want to have too big expectations because then I won't be disappointed. Or I don't want people to have expectations of me because then they won't be disappointed. So I'm going to talk down on myself and make myself small so that nobody's disappointed, right? And what I thought was being humble or being, I didn't think of myself as worthy or deserving. I felt like that was like wrong to even think that way. And I think part of that goes back to roots and origins. I was raised in the Christian church, and I was very much raised that, we are born into sin, and we are born, we're not deserving. That language really rooted into me, like, I'm a sinner. I make mistakes all the time. I've told lies. I've done all kind of bad things. I'm kind of, I had a narrative that I was a bad person because I had done bad things and made mistakes. So I did not feel deserving. And so what happens is when you believe that, you think it, you believe it, your actions show it. So you don't expect much. You let people treat you bad. You let people talk to you any type of way. You find yourself in situations where your worth is not being honored. And so, and when I talked earlier about noticing your patterns, I started noticing, like, I can sit here and say, yeah, I have good self-esteem and self-worth, but then I let somebody go and violate my boundaries, or, I don't speak up for myself, or I don't believe that I'm allowed to take up space in the situation. That shows that my self-worth is not necessarily where it needs to be. So what do I do with that? And it really starts with your own inner narrative and believing, how do you change that core belief that you don't deserve better?
Mm-hmm.
And
Right.
so there's an exercise in the book that I offer, and people can read that. But essentially, what the exercise is a narrative coaching method where, for those things that are really rooted in that you don't believe, there are some people who really really speak to the power of affirmations, and affirmations can be very powerful, right?
Right.
But there were certain ones for me that no matter how, I could say it a million times, I could write it on the board a million times, and I still would not believe it. Like, it's
Right.
just like the dissonance. Like, I'm saying I feel I'm worthy, but I don't believe it, right? So how
Mm-hmm.
do I change this core belief that I really want to believe that I'm worthy, but I don't believe it? And so there's a method in there in how we can start combining these beliefs that we want to change and combining it with actions that make
Yeah.
us feel that way. So if I really want to believe I'm worthy, what's some small thing I could do? Well, next time somebody does XYZ, I can correct them and say, no, actually,
Right.
I prefer this, or speaking
Mm-hmm.
up for myself, or doing the opposite of that unworthy behavior I used to have. So I won't get into the exact exercise, but
Right. Because y'all got to read
right. It's a
it.
method that can really help us to embody that change in belief, so that eventually you really live your way into that thing that you want to change in your beliefs about yourself. But there's so many layers to it. It also gets into like conversations we have,
Mm-hmm.
things that aren't helpful, gossiping, complaining, just that's tricky though. It's so tricky, Marcy, because you have your friends and your like sometimes like disempowering conversations like that I used to entertain, or being around someone who just talks in a way that you're just kind of like, I'm not on that vibration anymore. I don't really want to have these like, I want to change the subject because you're talking bad about somebody or just whatever it is. And I think that's why that chapter is really challenging, because it forces you to confront like habits that you've had and dynamics you've been in that maybe you didn't realize before was kind of going against this version of yourself that you really want to embody and to be. So we have to
Mm-hmm.
give ourselves grace to work through it.
Yes. Yes. And that's why I wanted to lean in there as well, because that, for me, it goes back to, the faces that you have. You might have had this face that was okay with certain things at a certain point, but then as you start to become more of who you want to be, sometimes you don't want to be parts of certain things anymore.
Yes.
And what
Yes.
does that look like? And
Yeah.
what words are you saying? What words are you saying about others? Again, what things are you entertaining? What things are you allowing people to say to you? They be like, no, we're not doing that anymore.
That's right.
so, so
Yeah,
yes,
it's a big change. Things you say about yourself, like
yeah,
talking down on yourself, making yourself small, all of
mm-hmm.
those things, we don't realize it makes a difference.
It
We
makes a
don't we
difference.
don't realize, but it really, really does.
It really does. And that's why I told you this book here, I'm going to go back and work through the exercises. I'm going to get in on the things that you make available through your Substack and all of that. Last but not least, well, I'm sorry. Is it okay if I have a couple extra minutes from you?
That's fine.
I know we're going to go over sometimes if that happens, but this is a good conversation. You talk about self-care.
Mm-hmm.
And making responsible choices. I just really, that's one I'm going to probably read a bunch of times, honestly, just because, it's one thing, to be the person that talks the talk, but not necessarily walking the walk. And part of walking the walk, literally in some cases and figuratively, is about how we care for ourselves, not just writing these things that look good on paper, but then your life doesn't align with the things that you might be putting on paper or the stories that you might be telling.
Yes, absolutely. Just like we said, your words have to, what you really believe and what you're saying, if they contradict, that's an issue. Same thing with your actions, how you take care of yourself, right? So in the book, I talk about how I was writing and I felt like I was speaking life into myself and to others, and, encouraging people to treat themselves better and to speak about themselves better, and how writing was this tool for that. But my actions, insofar as the alignment of all the different aspects of, so there's mental, there's emotional, there's spiritual. My physical and some of the other, maybe like financial, like these other parts of the pie weren't getting the attention and and that deservingness that all some of the other areas where it was easy for me to pour into myself spiritually. It was easy for me to pour into myself creatively, but not so much in these other areas. So in that chapter, I really break down how it's important to look at all these aspects of your life and realize that it's all connected. And how you treat yourself is a direct reflection of what you believe you deserve, what you believe that what you know about your needs. Again, sometimes we don't know our needs because
Right.
we've gotten so far away, we've ignored them for so long, and we wonder why we feel depleted or we feel overworked, or we feel all these different things. We need to get back in touch with what we really need. It's the ultimate act of self-care. It's like, what do you need? And we also need self-care to cope with all of the change and transformation we're talking about here,
Right.
all of this inner work.
Yeah.
I guess in a way, in and of itself, it's self-care, but like you're going through a lot of, you just really need to be supporting yourself. So I talk about moving your body, helping you to, get your circulation going, get in, and it's really good for your mental health as well. Like moving your body, that's essential. And that's a lot for many of us. That's something that gets skipped in the course of doing all the other things. How we eat, what we're putting into our bodies, knowing what we need to stimulate us intellectually, like reading books, or like everybody's things that they need, and that what fuels them is different.
Right.
But self-care is so much bigger than just pampering yourself,
Right.
or and it doesn't have to be something that costs money. Self-care is just knowing what your needs are on a very basic, fundamental level, and carving out the time, energy, the resources. And when I say resources, I just mean like, water, healthy food, and there's even privilege with that, unfortunately, right? That comes with that. But to the best of your ability, meeting your needs so that you can show up as your full, authentic self, like we're talking about here, and so that you can have the energy. We didn't get into all of this, but like you're actually, when you develop new storylines, you're creating new neural pathways in your brain. So your body's working to create this new story. So you've got to be taking care of yourself, pouring into yourself. You can't have those habits of neglect that many of us have normalized anymore if you want to change your story. So even just that worthiness, which has been a theme we've talked about today, is like when I said, I say I'm worthy, that I believe I'm worthy, but I don't act like it. Self-care is an example. If I'm not getting enough sleep, or saying, hey, I need a break, or I need more time on this assignment, or just whatever it is that I need to take care of myself, then I'm not acting like I'm worthy. And I'm not going to believe it when I say it. So it has to like be that aligned action with the belief and the values that we want to center in our lives. It's so important, and it can be overwhelming, but again, just like everything else, it's baby steps. It's just first, just noticing where you're out of alignment, where you're not honoring your needs. Just notice it at first, and then start thinking of small ways you can start to adjust.
Yes, that's so good. That's so good. Now, in the last chapter of the book, you talk about love and fear and surrendering to your calling. But I want to lean this in a little bit of a different way, because you do touch on it in the book. We are in a very challenging time here in the U.S. right now. There are a lot of things going on. And so there are people who are experiencing fear for a lot of reasons, and it's very justifiable in certain ways. But when it comes to like, continuing to have self-discovery, continuing to write our own narratives and tell our own stories, what is a way that you think that we can navigate that right now as we move through these times?
It's a great question. What I've been leaning into is the sense that we have to get through this together. So individually, we need to be acknowledging how we feel, what our fears are, what our desires and dreams and visions, and where our hope comes from, like what our faith is in, acknowledging all of those things, and how we can use our gifts and where we are in some way to support the collective. So community is a big part of how we're going to get through this. And I think that each person has different ways they can contribute. Everybody's not meant to be doing the same thing, right?
Right.
So, you know, if you feel like, how can I make a difference? I feel hopeless or I feel helpless, even in the smallest way, if it's helping out your neighbor or helping somebody in your community or in your church or your kid's school, we need love, we need kindness, we need generosity. What are some of the small ways that you can show up? And sometimes we need to discover that and reinforce that first with our own. So we're talking about writing here, we're talking about journaling, we're talking about self-discovery, is realizing that all of us have qualities and gifts and characteristics that we can use to serve, right? But we do need to believe in ourselves and know ourselves enough to know what those things are. We don't have to be performative out here, like during this time, like, oh, I need to be doing what that person is doing or showing up how this person's showing up. No, like, what is your thing? Or do you cook? Like, maybe you could prepare some food and, you know, get involved with some type of service in that way. Or you're good with kids, maybe you could, I don't know. But like, I remember seeing, like I tend to, you know, on social media, I'll save little inspirational feel good things that I see. All the devastation going on in Gaza, I saw a man who was like bringing all the kids together and playing music for them, you know, and had them dancing and was teaching them songs. And he's using his gifts, his love of music, to pour some hope into these babies, you know. So like, what is it that you may be overlooking in yourself that you can do? And nothing is too small. Nothing is too small. And sometimes you can rediscover those things about yourself through that, just connecting with yourself and, you know, looking at yourself and saying, well, you know, sometimes there are things that we value about ourselves or that we love or that we're interested in that maybe somebody in your life told you it wasn't important or that it's not enough or it's not going to help. Question that, because who you are and what you naturally gravitate towards and, you know, where you feel like you might be able to serve, there's power in that, right? But we have to be, you know, aware enough to question those voices that tell us that it's not. So yeah, I think it really has to do with that self-awareness and using what you know about yourself to contribute and make a difference.
Thank you for that, because it's just so important for all of us at all times, but especially, you know, right now in the time today, there are a lot of things that are happening that are giving people a lot of reasons to be concerned, and just how do we continue to show up fully as ourselves. But Story Work comes out on 11/4 if you're watching this in real time or within the next few days. So if you all have not had an opportunity to pre-order a copy of it yet, there's still time to get your pre-orders in. And as somebody mentioned, ask for it in your libraries, all those sorts of things. Now, Gigi, will this also be an audio or?
I don't know. Hopefully not. It's not yet. It's available as a Kindle, but it's not audio yet.
Okay. But yes, I think that it's really good though, because again, as I said, I read through it because I wanted to be able to have this conversation, right? But I definitely suggest that, you know, if you get it, when you get it, not if, when you get it, that, you know, you work through the questions, you know, there might be other questions that come up that as you're working through it. Yes. Get yourself a little journal to go on the side, you know, to go with it, because there's not enough room to like really get into some of these deep questions. But yes, make sure you have a space, you know, where you can write. And these are just the people, you know, work on it by themselves, of course. But do you think this is a good tool for people to work on in group as well?
Absolutely, yes. Do it with a partner or with a small group of friends. I think it's great for that. And like you said, get your little journal to be your companion along with the book. And you can do it as a self-study or together. It works both ways. And it's great for book club type discussion as well.
All right. So being that it's coming out in a few days, are there any spaces or places where you'll be going to promote the book over the next month or so that people might be able to come out and meet you in person?
Yes, I will be. I live in the DC area, so I have my in-person launch on Wednesday the 5th at the Writers Center in Bethesda. That's free and open to the public. And I have a lot of virtual events. So I'll be doing a series of Instagram lives with various writers and peers of mine, and we're talking about storytelling and self-discovery. I have a virtual launch, which will be a craft talk and workshop. So anybody who wants to learn more about the book, but maybe also about writing their own story and the creative, the craft process of it all. And we'll even have like a little section for a little workshop where we'll do a little question I'll ask and give people a chance to do some writing. And then I have an author panel on November 16th where I've invited 4 authors to come talk about storytelling as well. So the best thing I would say is to perhaps follow me on Instagram at GG Renee Writes, as Marcy has already included on the screen, or on my Substack where I'll be sharing all of these events, all the details, all the links. And if you pre-order, you also get access to, right, the pre-order is for the author panel. So to go to the author panel, you have to buy a book. That's your ticket.
Okay.
So, right. So that everything else, though, is free and open to the public. But yeah, follow me on Instagram or follow me on Substack, and you can get the lowdown on all the events that are coming up. And there will be more going into December. And like I was saying, Marcy, before we got on the call, like I'm going to be talking about story work for the next however long. So this is just the beginning, really.
Yeah, indefinitely, because I think that, as we did talk about before we came on, as people discover the book and have a chance to like really, see the value in it and start to work through it, people are watching this, will pick it up and go through it, work through it, and then share with friends and things like that. So I'm really excited for this work. This is our first time talking to each other, but I know that there'll be more coming from you, and I look forward to doing it again. I already said I'm going to get on that Substack because I got some things that I'm working on personally, and this will be a really good framework for me to navigate those things. So I really appreciate you for being here. Thank you for doing this work. Thank you for encouraging others. Thank you for, operating in your gifts. We definitely do appreciate you. GG Renee Hill, I'm giving the whole name. We appreciate you. Yes, Gina is saying thank you. Yes, this is just really powerful and needed, at this time. So thank you for being here. Now, if you don't mind, just hold on for me for a second. I'm going to give them a couple announcements, but don't you hang up just yet because
no problem.
We're going to debrief. Thank you again.
Thank you.
All right. Well, that was such a wonderful conversation. As always, I am blessed to be able to have the people that come into this space to have conversations with us. And, some folks find it later on and then they go and buy the book or whatever the case may be. But thank you to everyone for being here. And if you have not picked up a copy yet, it is available in the Brown Girl Collective bookstore, which is just that browngirlcollectivebookstore.com. That is affiliated with Bookshop if you like to shop on Bookshop, so you can pick up a copy there. Now, by means of what's happening next, actually, I am on vacay from the day job this week. So tomorrow I'm going to have an extra special conversation with a young lady who lives in West Africa. And we're going to be talking about signs and sky mates. Yes, we're going to be talking about astrological compatibility. So I'm looking forward to that. For those of you all have interest in those sorts of things, that's with Dosevia Trenu. So we're going to talk about her book tomorrow. I'm just telling you, I ain't reading the whole thing because you see how thick that is. But I will at least read the parts that pertain to the signs that I am. And when you watch that episode, you'll get to find out exactly, what my signs are and see if it is what you think it is. She's also written a book, Melanin Magic, A Young Mystic's Guide to African Spirituality. So we'll be talking a little bit about both of those books tomorrow. That will be at noon Eastern time if you're able to catch it live. And other than that, it will be available to you to watch in the replay. Okay, Scorpio. Well, I'll tell you, one of my signs is Libra, but I got a rising and all those other things. So you're going to find out what those are. And so then on Monday, we will have Taj McCoy, who will be here for her second visit. She'll be here Monday night at the regular time at 8 p.m. to talk about The Dating Prohibition, which is her latest romance novel. And then a week from today, we will have Keisha N. Blaine here to talk about Without Fear, Black Women and the Making of Human Rights. So we got some good stuff going on on, and this is just next week. There's going to be a lot. We are running till mid-December here. So there are a lot of great people that are on the horizon and things like that. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you for your time, your energy, and your effort. Don't forget to go grab a copy of Storywork, because that's what we're here to talk about tonight. And I look forward to seeing you all again real soon. Take good care.